Shalom, I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you today to our study on the Hebraic roots of Christianity. We are doing a series on what the rabbis and Judaism teaches about the 10 tribes of Israel, the northern kingdom, known by the term Ephraim or the house of Joseph. And in order to help us to understand what the rabbis in Judaism believes about the 10 tribes, who they are, where they were located, what happened to them, and their unification with Judah in the end of days as prophesied by Ezekiel chapter 37 verses 15 through 28. I am here in Jerusalem with Yair Davidiy. Yair Davidiy is an Orthodox Jew, and so he spends his full time doing research on the 10 tribes of Israel, and he's got a website where the compilation of this research is found. The website is Brit-Am.org. He's written a number of books on this subject and his research findings, and what Yair does is he completely presents his information from an Orthodox Jewish rabbinical point of view. He gives the biblical verses, biblical prophecies, as well as rabbinic sources, history, archaeology, linguistics, and you put it all together, we can characteristically understand what happened to the 10 tribes of Israel. They're not truly lost. They just were intermarried with the peoples where they settled. They lost their individual identity, but the Bible prophesies in the end of days that they will return and they will be united with Judah. So Yair, it's a joy to once again have you on the program today. And the last several weeks on the program, we've been discussing the biblical characteristics of the tribes of Israel. We want to continue looking at the prophecies regarding them, so we can identify, when we look at all this body of evidence, all the characteristics of who are these people, who might they be. And you've definitely made a connection that, among other things, that Western peoples are dominated by the tribes of Israel, Western Europe, the United States, but also includes, because the Bible says they go to the Isles of the Sea, it includes Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and these countries. And so in the last program we went over the prophecy of Hosea chapter 7 verse 8 that Ephraim would be mixed or mingled among the peoples, and we explained what that meant as it related to the prophecies of Hosea, that Hosea would marry someone by the name of Gomer and beget strange children, which could be interpreted as non-Israelite children. And then even the name Gomer has a historical connection, because King Omri, who was a king of the northern kingdom, when the Assyrians took the northern kingdom captivity, they named the peoples who they took captive Gomri or Gomer, and then historically these people became associated with the Sumerians, not Sumerians, Cimmerians, and Scythian peoples, and that's what we covered in our last program. So we want to continue and looking at biblical characteristics as prophesied of the tribes of Israel. And so let's look at Isaiah chapter 49 and verse 8, where here it says that in their exile they would settle desolate regions. Let's specifically look at that verse, Isaiah chapter 49 and verse 8. It says, "Thus says the Lord, in an acceptable time have I heard you, and in the day of salvation have I helped you. I will preserve you, and I will give you for a covenant of the peoples." That's where you get the term Brit-Am, the name of your organization. But then it says, "to establish the earth, to cause to inherit the desolate heritage." So how do we understand where it's prophesied that the tribes of Israel, and specifically the 10 tribes, would inherit desolate places. What would be the fulfillment of that?
So the way we understand it is that most areas that were colonized from Britain, relatively speaking, were uninhabited or sparsely inhabited, and possibly the higher cultures had existed in those areas beforehand, but they were decaying, and they were being denuded of their inhabitants on a relative basis. For instance, in Australia you had only a few tens of thousands of Aborigines running around and naked. They were primitive by all standards, even though nowadays it's not fashionable to call people primitive, but that is what they were. Also their culture was so constituted that they could never really acquire new knowledge, but only retain what they already had, and they would constantly lose what they had. They were not evolving, but rather devolving. And in other words, what they had was a desolate heritage, and that is what was inherited by the tribes of Israel, which is also connected, to this verse. So
that the desolate places can be connected to, in the settling of those places, Australia, New Zealand,
North America, sorry,
and even the United States as well. From the 1700s, the United States was a very sparsely inhabited place that the peoples, mainly from Europe, who came and settled originally in the United States, they settled the whole country, populated the country so that the desolate regions became inhabited.
Yes.
So
also in Canada.
Canada as well. So so here you're making an association to this prophecy being connected to Western peoples, being connected with Australia, New Zealand, correct?
Yes. And North America, also South Africa to some degree.
And so, is there anything else that you want to say regarding this and the application of the meaning of it?
No. Also, it says to establish the earth. In other words, to make the earth a better place to live in. That's what these peoples have done. People we identify with those tribes of Israel, Anglo-Saxon, English-speaking peoples. Also, the French and the Dutch and related to Scandinavians, all each in their own way, have been a civilizing element in the world. Relative to other nations, have been a positive element on the whole. They've done good and not evil, and they have brought a blessing and not a curse to wherever they went.
Okay, now let's look at something else. Isaiah chapter 60 verse 9. It says, "Surely the isles shall wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish first, the ships of Tarshish, to bring your sons from far." And then also we have in Psalms chapter 72 and in verse 10 it says, "The kings of Tarshish and the isles shall present presents. The kings of Sheba and Seba shall offer them." So here we have Isaiah chapter 60 verse 9 and Psalm 72 verse 10 mentions Tarshish.
Yes.
So what is Tarshish a reference to?
So, but it is also interesting.
So
if the verse just before,
that's verse 8, Isaiah 60 verse 8.
It says, "Who are these that fly as the cloud and as the doves to their windows?" In other words, it's talking about people coming back, flying like clouds and like pigeons in the sky. In other words, air travel.
Airplanes, okay.
Isaiah was talking about airplanes before they existed. Isaiah, a long, long time ago.
Obviously, he didn't know about airplanes. He has to describe it in the terms of the language of his day.
And this is how he describes it.
Okay.
And also it says, "The ships shall wait, the ships of Tarshish first." So this is talking about bringing them back. The ships of Tarshish will be used to help to bring the people back, to bring Israelites back to the land of Israel.
So who do you identify Tarshish, and what is Tarshish?
So the kings, also in the Psalms, which is the kings of Tarshish and of the isles, so it's related to the islands, and we saw how the Israelites were also connected to the islands. That is throughout numerous verses in the Bible, in Isaiah and Jeremiah and elsewhere. And in the Aramaic translation to this, the kings of Tarshish, it says that they will be the isles in the sea, and also the Oceanus, Yam Oceanus, which is an Aramaic term meaning the Atlantic Ocean. And that is how Tarshish was traditionally understood.
So in the rabbinical writings, in the rabbinical backgrounds, that there was a connection of Tarshish to the peoples in the Isles and the Atlantic Ocean. That's what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, continue.
Historically in southwest Spain, what is now southwest Spain, close to what is now Gibraltar, but a little bit further to the west and north, there was a small kingdom known as Tartessus. And in Phoenician writings, and if Phoenicians were enjoyed the same civilization as the Hebrews, they spoke a similar language. The Phoenicians referred to Tartessus as Tarshish. There's also another place called Tarshish in southeast Turkey, but for different reasons. The biblical Tarshish is usually, not always, is usually referring to this area in Spain, because we know, because Ezekiel also speaks about it. He speaks about them bringing back lead and silver and other minerals that could come from this area in Spain and nowhere else, or else from the British Isles. Since in the biblical codes we found a link between Tarshish and Ireland, and therefore we couldn't. There is a connection between the British Isles, Tarshish, and this area of Spain, because also from this area of Spain, or southwest Spain, peoples migrated to Ireland and to the British Isles. Some of the Israelites moved through Spain on their way westward, and from there they moved onwards, so into the north, to France or to the British Isles. And in the rabbinical terminology, Tarshish means the Atlantic Ocean. So therefore, the lost tribes will return from ships that ply the Atlantic Ocean, from the Atlantic Ocean area. And therefore, they are returned from the Atlantic Ocean area. Therefore, the lost tribes in the end times must be on the Atlantic, in lands adjoining the Atlantic Ocean. The areas that adjoin the Atlantic Ocean include North America, and they include the British Isles, and they include Western Europe. And that is where other indications, numerous additional indications, show us that the lost tribes indeed are to be found today.
Okay, Isaiah chapter 28 verse 11, "For with stammering lips and another tongue will I speak unto this people." So another tongue, could we interpret that as being a language other than Hebrew?
Yes, that's what it says.
Okay, so what's being said here is that Ephraim will, and the 10 tribes of Israel will leave the land of Israel, and then leaving the land of Israel, they won't speak the Hebrew language, right? Yes. So this is one of the characteristics of the 10 tribes, that in their return, they're going to be speaking other languages of the world. And so but in their scattering, it says that they are, Isaiah chapter 48 and verse 8, it's going to refer to them being a light to the nations. And so maybe it's Isaiah chapter 49, that here one of the prophecies about the tribes of Israel is they have a mission to be a light to the nations. Is the application of being a light to the nations, was that even fulfilled in the exile of the tribes of Israel? That even in their exile, in the places where they went, in the countries that they established, that they were a blessing to the peoples of the earth? Can we understand a light to the nations in that way, or how do we understand that prophecy?
Yes, this touches on an important principle in our thinking. The reason for the lost tribes to have been exiled was in order to uplift, to go down, in other words, to go down themselves, to go down in their level of civilization, and then to rise up again and bring the rest of the world with them. They were to be a civilizing element amongst the nations, amongst the peoples of the earth. In the very blessing to Abraham, I will make him a great. God says when He was blessed Abraham, just before when the angels came to visit Abraham after his circumcision, when he was on their way to Sodom and Gomorrah, and God says, "Well, shall I be hold back from revealing to Abraham that which I am going to do? And surely Abraham will become a great and mighty nation." And He says, "Will become a great nation. In him will all the nations of the earth be blessed." Elsewhere He says, "You'll become a great and mighty nation, And in you will all the earth, all the peoples of the earth will receive a blessing. And the other blessings continue on a similar note. In other words, to become great and mighty was in order to bring a blessing on other peoples. That was the reason for it, not only for itself, but in order to bring a blessing. First they had to become great and mighty, and through becoming great and mighty, they would bring blessings on other peoples. And
bring a blessing to other peoples, they would in part fulfill being a light to the nations.
Yes, and this is also the whole story of Joseph, where Joseph was a historical character. It did happen, but he is also representative of this process. Joseph was taken into captivity. He lost his identity, was lost to his brothers, to everyone else, but he became the king, the most powerful kind of man in the land. And through his policies, he kept the whole of the civilized world at that time in existence. He saved all of Egypt, and he also saved his own people. He was the one who gave out the food, the mashbir, the seller of food, or the distributor of provenance to all the earth in his time. And his descendants, Joseph, the tribes of Joseph, were destined to play a similar role. They were to be a light to the nations. There was elsewhere it says Joseph will give justice and judgment will come from them, become a great and mighty nation through them. All the nations of the earth shall be blessed, and it goes on. There are other additional blessings in the Bible along these same lines, and in Jewish thought, especially the thought of Rav Kook and other great Jewish thinkers. There's much emphasis on this. The whole task of Joseph. Joseph represents the Israelite personality. Becomes assimilated amongst the nations, but elevates the nations from within, and brings the non-Israelite nations forward. Advances the world along with himself.
So
this is the essence of Joseph.
So for the descendants of Abraham, which would include Joseph, in Genesis chapter 18 and verses 18 and 19, it says, "Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation," or his descendants, "and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him, for I know him that he will command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, to do justice and judgment." So regarding Abraham and his descendants, it said that they would be great and mighty, and they will bless other peoples, and they will do justice and judgment.
Continue reading, please.
That the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he had spoken of him.
So in Hebrew, also in English, you can read it, that the Lord will bring that which he has spoken of, to Abraham upon him, in order that he become a great and mighty nation, and bless all the nations of the earth through this. In other words, one of the reasons that the Israelites would receive this blessing was in order that they be able to civilize the rest of humanity, or bring the rest of humanity to a higher level.
So part of the mission of the Israelite peoples, the descendants of Abraham, but the rabbis say specifically of Joseph,
yes,
is that in his exile he is to be elevated, to be a light to the nations, to be numerous and a blessing to other peoples, and that in being a blessing to other peoples, part of what he would do is he would bring justice and judgment
to the people,
to the peoples, to the nations, to the earth.
Yes.
So how do we see the fulfillment of that?
So we see it now. We identify the sense of Joseph amongst the British peoples and people descended from them or associated with them. Primarily the Anglo-Saxons, English-speaking peoples in North America, in the USA, and they were a civilizing influence upon the world. First, the British Empire did elevate, did unite peoples. India was a very backward country when the British took it over. They were fighting amongst each other, killing each other. They had human sacrifice and periodic famines, artificially induced famines, and a whole lot of problems that the British solved for them. Even though they may have done, and India now is a great country, or relatively speaking to what it was previously. To some degree, even the Indians themselves now admit, to a large degree, thanks to the British. And also, whilst the British ruled in different areas of Africa, these areas were food producing, and they were in a higher state of civilization, of economic stability than they are at present. And so too the Americans throughout, there's almost not a nation in the world, or probably not a nation in the world that has not benefited from the largesse of America, America's beneficence, of America helping it, assisting it, giving it free gifts of food and material, but also teaching it to American technology and showing them how to help themselves, to advance themselves, to get ahead, and whenever anything happens, God forbid, earthquake or flooding or tornadoes or something really serious throughout the world, you know who's going to help. First of all, America's going to step in, and then other countries are going to come and help. Probably the British, probably the Australians, probably Scandinavian nations, all nations that we identify as being the substantially obvious right descent, and they're going to be the major ones. You can put money on it. Japan is hardly ever going to do anything. Germany is going to do very little. Other nations are going to do nothing, you can be certain, even though they can do it. But these nations are going to be there, to some degree or other, and they're going to be the ones who offer the assistance, and very often the assistance is going to be to make the difference between life and death for numerous peoples. And this is what they do all the time, both through on-hand policies, both through military force, and both through setting an example, and both through generosity and education, and any way possible, bringing light to the rest of the world.
So in being a light to the nations, in being numerous, they in their exile, they were to be blessed and numerous and prosper in their exile. So even though they themselves lost understanding who they were, they still were going to fulfill the prophecies regarding them, and they were going to bring justice to the world, be humanitarian, be a blessing to others. And so this is...
can I make a slight
go ahead. Yeah.
So this is how we understand, based on the writings of Rav Kook and other writings from also biblical verses and other major Orthodox Jewish thinkers, that originally the plan is, if the original plan of the Almighty, as if to say, was that the children of Israel should come out of Egypt, receive the Torah, and conquer the world or influence all the world whilst keeping the Torah to be better people. But it was too much for them. The world was not ready for them, and they were not ready for the world. They couldn't do it, and the world couldn't take them. So in order for something of the plan to go ahead all the same, we had to divide the forces, as if to say. One section had to would stay alone, separate, and keep the Torah, which was Judah, and the other section would become like the Gentiles, as if to say, go underground, but from that position emerge and go upward and bring the rest of the world along with it, until eventually the world will have evolved, will have advanced forward, so that Judah will be able to return. Also at that time, it would have been difficult for a nation to make a normal, go through the normal stages of advancement without having to descend into some level of barbarity, to do things which are against what the Torah ideals. Therefore the Jews had to be, as if to say, scattered amongst the nations and not have a country of their own, till the world would change. The situation would be changed when it would be possible to establish a nation upon the principles of righteousness, as well as keep the Torah, and then the Jews would come back, and so the Jews have come back. And Joseph has fulfilled his task to some degree. He has made his influence spread his influence as much as possible, and perhaps to saturation point, unless there is some significant change, the rest of the world is no longer capable of absorbing or taking more good from Joseph, as if to say. So this indicates that the time for the changing of the task once more, for the reunification of the two forces of Judah and Joseph, is very close upon us.
Okay, so what about also being a light to the nations? It was prophesied in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 8. It says, I will preserve you and give you for a covenant of the people, Brit-Am. So, how do we understand this prophecy, and how may it relate to being a light to the nations and to be a blessing to the nations? We have 1 minute.
How would it be performed?
The prophecy of there would be a covenant people. I'll make a covenant. I'll make a covenant of the people, Brit-Am. So this is also one of the things that was prophesied unto them. So how do we understand that? We got 1 minute.
That they became a covenant people.
Yeah.
They became a people who had ideals, who believed in the truth, and this is there's an underlying covenant of the people, both in the American national consciousness and also amongst the British, as if something is a power beyond themselves, an ideal beyond themselves, in which the whole commonwealth of the nation is constituted and must strive towards.
Yeah, covenant of the people, the united. It's called
For the
the
good of the
united.
people, for the good of the people, for the good of the people, and emanating from the people.
So it's called the United States of America, the United Kingdom, the covenant of the people. So it can have this application and understanding of being a light to the nation and a blessing to the peoples of the earth. So this is the calling and the task of the 10 tribes. This is the calling and the task of Joseph in exile. And we see historically how from the prophecies in the Bible that the 10 tribes and Joseph fulfills and carried out this mission. Even though they may have not have been intellectually aware of what they were doing, they were given the blessing to do it, so they carried it out anyhow. And so we see how God's word is not going to return to him void. What he says is going to happen is going to happen. So we pray that the program has been a blessing to you today.